Even the largest animal ever to live on Earth does not rule the entire ocean, and there is a specific part of it that even blue whales consistently avoid, not because they are incapable of reaching it, but because surviving there simply does not make sense from an energy standpoint. The blue whale is built for efficiency at an extreme scale, capable of traveling thousands of kilometers, diving hundreds of meters, and consuming enormous quantities of krill while spending surprisingly little energy for its size. But that efficiency only works under very specific conditions, where food is concentrated, predictable, and abundant enough to justify the effort. As you move away from productive coastal waters and descend into the deeper open ocean, those conditions begin to disappear. Sunlight fades, primary production collapses, and food no longer grows locally, instead arriving slowly from above as scattered organic debris, drifting down through kilometers of water. In this environment, the ocean becomes an energy desert, where prey is sparse, spread thin across vast volumes of darkness, and never concentrated into dense layers large animals depend on. For a blue whale, filtering water here would burn more calories than it could ever recover. The whale could swim through these depths. It could physically endure the pressure and the cold, but it would be moving through a system that offers no return on investment. Every stroke would cost oxygen, every dive would drain reserves, and every hour spent searching would push the animal closer to deficit rather than survival. This is why blue whales remain tied to productive regions such as polar feeding grounds, upwelling zones, and continental shelves, where physics compresses life into usable layers and where energy flows fast enough to support giants. In the deep open ocean below, the rules change completely. Here, the system favors animals that move slowly, eat little, and survive on scarcity. In the open ocean, survival is decided by a continuous balance between energy gained and energy spent, where every movement, every dive, and every minute of searching carries a measurable cost that must be repaid by food dense enough to justify the effort. Near the surface, this balance is easy to maintain because sunlight drives plankton growth. Plankton supports krill, and krill concentrates into massive, predictable layers that allow large animals to feed efficiently and move on with surplus energy. As depth increases and productive waters give way to the deep offshore ocean, that structure begins to dissolve, and the system stops generating food locally, relying instead on organic material that sinks from far above, broken apart by currents and time long before it reaches the depths. What remains is not absence, but dilution, where life exists everywhere yet nowhere in sufficient concentration to support large-scale feeding. In this diluted environment, the cost of searching quickly overtakes the value of what can be found, because prey is scattered across enormous volumes of water, forcing animals to travel farther, dive longer, and expend more oxygen for each unit of energy gained. For large animals, whose bodies demand constant intake to remain efficient, this turns size from an advantage into a liability. A whale could physically enter these regions, withstand the cold and tolerate the pressure, but it would be operating inside a system that guarantees diminishing returns, where every hour spent feeding would recover less energy than the hour before. Over time, that imbalance becomes fatal. This rule quietly draws invisible boundaries throughout the ocean, separating regions that can sustain giants from those that cannot. The unanswered questions now are how deep productive feeding layers can realistically extend, and which kinds of organisms are actually designed to survive once the ocean crosses that energetic threshold. It's worth saying that stories like this only exist because people are curious enough to follow them beyond the surface. Join of our community by subscribing to this channel. New episodes continue exploring the logic that governs the deep sea, the limits of life, and the invisible rules that decide who survives and who disappears, always through the lens of energy, efficiency, and consequence. There is a point where the system changes character, not marked by a sharp line or a sudden drop, but by a gradual thinning of opportunity that becomes impossible to ignore for large animals. This boundary appears well below the surface feeding layers, where sunlight no longer drives production directly, and where the ocean stops behaving like a three-dimensional buffet and starts behaving like a vast, dilute field of scattered calories. Here, food still exists, but it no longer forms the dense, predictable structures that make bulk feeding worthwhile. For a blue whale, feeding only works when enormous volumes of water contain enough prey to repay the cost of filtering it, and that calculation is extremely precise. If prey density drops just slightly below a critical level, the whale is no longer feeding. It is hemorrhaging energy with every pass. In this zone, krill swarms thin out, plankton layers fragment, and what remains is stretched across distances measured in kilometers rather than meters. The whale can search, dive and scan, but each additional minute spent looking reduces the chance that the search will ever pay off. This is where behavior changes become visible. Instead of deep, repeated dives, large whales begin to restrict their movements, staying tied to known productive layers and abandoning vertical exploration altogether. They are not repelled by pressure or darkness, but by probability. The ocean at this depth does not forbid entry. It simply refuses to reward it. There is no dramatic failure, no sudden danger, only a slow slide into inefficiency that large bodies cannot afford to tolerate for long. This first boundary is not the deepest limit of life, but it is the point where size stops being useful and where the open ocean begins filtering out giants without ever touching them. And beyond this boundary, the system becomes even more selective, favoring organisms that are built not to chase food, but to endure its absence. The deeper you go into the open ocean, the longer food takes to arrive from the surface, the more fragmented it becomes during its descent, and the wider the search area must be to find the same amount of usable energy. What once arrived as dense biological layers is now reduced to scattered particles and isolated organisms, separated by volumes of water so large that continuous feeding is no longer possible. For a massive body, this creates a compounding problem. Large animals burn more oxygen, require more calories to maintain basic functions, and lose efficiency rapidly when forced to travel long distances without guaranteed returns. At this scale, even perfect navigation and flawless physiology cannot overcome the simple fact that the ocean is no longer delivering energy fast enough to sustain bulk. As a result, the deep open ocean becomes dominated by a very different strategy of life. Instead of fast swimmers and active hunters, this realm favors animals that move slowly, drift with currents, ambush opportunistically, or survive on meals so rare that weeks or even months may pass between them. Metabolism slows, growth becomes minimal, and patience replaces pursuit as the primary survival tool. This is why the deeper layers of the ocean are not empty, but they are quiet, sparse, and biologically thin, populated by organisms that have adapted to scarcity rather than abundance. They are not built to exploit dense resources, but to tolerate long periods where resources barely exist. At this depth, the ocean has fully inverted the logic of the surface world. Efficiency no longer comes from size and power, but from restraint, conservation, and the ability to endure uncertainty without burning through limited reserves. And this is the point where the exclusion of giants becomes absolute. Because beyond it, the system no longer punishes inefficiency slowly, it eliminates it outright. At this depth, the downward flow of energy has thinned to almost nothing, with organic material arriving so slowly and in such small fragments that even finding food becomes a rare event rather than a routine process. What little energy reaches this zone is immediately contested, recycled, or consumed by organisms designed to extract maximum value from almost nothing. For a giant like a blue whale, entering this environment would mean operating inside a system where feeding events are separated by spans of time longer than the animal can afford to wait, because its body is built for steady intake rather than prolonged scarcity. No amount of muscle or size can overcome a food supply that simply does not arrive fast enough. This is the moment where the ocean reveals its most unforgiving truth. Evolution does not reward the biggest body, the strongest swimmer, or the deepest diver, but the organism that best matches the pace at which energy moves through the system. Below this limit, life persists in forms that seem almost alien, creatures that burn energy at a fraction of the rate seen near the surface, that grow slowly, reproduce cautiously, and survive on meals so small and infrequent they would be useless to any large animal. Here, success is measured not in dominance, but in endurance. This is why blue whales, despite their unmatched size and power, never cross this invisible threshold. They are not excluded by pressure or darkness, but by time, because the waiting itself becomes lethal. At the deepest levels of the open ocean, the system is perfectly balanced for scarcity, and any organism that demands abundance is filtered out without resistance. Imagine the open ocean far from land, far from ice and far from any visible boundary, where the surface appears calm and uniform, while beneath it stretches a vertical world measured not in meters, but in kilometers of water that most large animals never truly occupy. Somewhere above, moving within narrow productive layers, a blue whale glides through water shaped by currents, temperature, and biology, feeding where physics has compressed energy into forms large bodies can actually use. Below that layer, however, the ocean does not suddenly become dangerous or hostile, but instead becomes quiet, patient, and economically unforgiving, operating on a timescale that no large, continuously feeding animal can afford to match. Light fades completely, not as a dramatic cutoff, but as a gradual absence, while sound softens, movement slows, and the distance between one usable calorie and the next stretches farther with every additional meter of depth. In this part of the ocean, food has not disappeared, but it has lost all urgency. Organic material still falls from above, but it arrives late, broken apart by currents, consumed along the way, and reduced to fragments that no longer form the dense structures required to support large-scale feeding. Energy still exists here, but it moves slowly, irregularly, and without regard for the needs of animals built for abundance. If a blue whale were to descend into this system, it would not encounter resistance, pressure-related failure, or any immediate sense of threat, because nothing in this environment pushes back directly. Instead, the ocean simply stops cooperating, offering returns that are always slightly lower than the cost of searching, diving, and filtering, until time itself becomes the limiting factor. Hour after hour, movement would continue to drain oxygen, metabolism would continue to demand fuel, and the gap between energy spent and energy recovered would widen so gradually that there would be no single moment of failure, only the certainty that the math no longer closes. In this system, waiting is not neutral, and searching is not hopeful, because both slowly move the balance in the wrong direction. This is where the deep ocean reveals its most important rule, a rule that applies equally to all life, regardless of size, power, or evolutionary success. Survival is not about what you can endure once, but about what you can afford repeatedly over time. The largest animal ever to exist is not defeated here, not challenged and not tested, but gently filtered out by a system that never accelerates and never explains itself. Below this invisible threshold, life continues in forms that appear almost designed to avoid attention, organisms that drift instead of swim, wait instead of chase, and operate on metabolic budgets so small that weeks or months can pass between meaningful feeding events. They do not dominate this space, and they do not conquer it, but they align with it so precisely that scarcity stops being a problem and becomes the default condition. This is why the deep, open ocean is not empty, but it is quiet, thin, and restrained, populated by life that has learned to match the slow pulse of energy moving downward through the water column. Here, success is measured not by speed or size, but by patience, conservation, and the ability to remain functional while almost nothing happens. In the end, the blue whale does not avoid these depths out of fear or limitation, but because evolution has already drawn the boundary with perfect accuracy, defining where efficiency ends and waste begins. The whale remains above, not as a ruler of the ocean, but as a specialist, perfectly adapted to the places where energy gathers fast enough to support giants. And that is the quiet conclusion of the deep sea, that the ocean does not reward ambition, dominance, or excess, but alignment, precision, and restraint, and that even the greatest giant in the history of life survives not by going everywhere, but by knowing exactly where not to go. I hope that you enjoyed this episode, subscribing to this channel for more videos like this. Until the next video.